I think corruption is so important and hot today that it deserves an own comprehensive program against corruption, which brings all the players together.
I would like to welcome our listeners to our podcast series, iGlobenews Pods. The title of our podcast today is How IACA Can Raise Awareness and Fight Corruption Through Education and Training. Joining me is the Dean of the International Anti-Corruption Academy, also known as IACA, Dr. Stelzer. iGlobenews is very honored that you took the time today to talk to our listeners. Thank you, Dr. Stelzer. Before proceeding with our interview, I would like to provide our listeners with some key facts of IACA and also to briefly introduce Dr. Stelzer to our audience. IACA is an international organization. More than 80 parties have ratified or acceded to IACA's founding treaty. The focus of IACA is professional education on, as the name suggests, anti-corruption and compliance issues. To date, IACA has hosted over 3,100 students from over 163 countries, spanning 5 continents. IACA is based in lovely Vienna, just like iGlobenews. I would like to take this opportunity to invite our listeners to visit our website at www.iglobenews.org. Please take a moment to sign up for our newsletter and become part of the iGlobenews community. Dr. Stelzer is an Austrian career diplomat. Multilateral diplomacy has always been his focus. He started his diplomatic career at the UN in New York, working on issues related to the CSCE, the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, international security and disarmament, the United Nations Development Fund, the United Nations Population Fund, and the United Nations Children's Fund, to name a few. He was Austria's deputy director of the Austrian Cultural Institute in New York and was appointed special assistant to the executive secretary of the CTBTO, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. From 2001 to 2008, Ambassador Stelzer was Austria's permanent representative to the UN office in Vienna, the International Atomic Energy Agency, UNIDO, and the CTBTO. He held many other important offices. In particular, he chaired the Vienna Terrorism Symposium in 2002 and 2007, and the CTBTO Preparatory Commission. Dr. Stelzer was appointed by then United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon as UN Assistant Secretary General for Policy and Coordination and Interagency Affairs. He was also the secretary of the UN Chief Executives Board, and as such, he played a key role in IACA's conceptualization and establishment. Before becoming the dean and executive secretary of IACA, Dr. Stelzer served as Austria's ambassador to Portugal. He has lectured at the University of Vienna, and he holds degrees from the University of Vienna, Stanford University, and Johns Hopkins. He's fluent in 6 languages. Welcome, Dr. Stelzer. During our interview, we will touch upon IACA's background, its goals and motivations. We will discuss IACA's educational focus and how COVID-19 impacted IACA's business model. Finally, we will discuss how you see IACA's future development. So let me start by asking you why corruption has become one of the most serious white-collar crimes of our time, and has the advent of the internet played a role in the global proliferation of corruption?
Thank you very much. Thank you for this very kind introduction that reminds me of how many years I've accumulated. I don't think that corruption has recently become a major crime. It has always been with us. As long as we can remember, there was corruption around. What has changed is that we have become aware of corruption. For a long time, corruption was like a shadow over our societies, too big to be fought, limiting our access to justice, hindering equity, development, siphoning away enormous amounts of money from the economies. But we didn't really have any strong legal means to fight corruption. All of that changed about 20 years ago when we negotiated in Vienna the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, a legal instrument which gives us the opportunity and the legal basis to fight corruption efficiently on the basis of the rule of law. So that was a major change. In fact, the negotiations were preceded by a resolution of the Crime Commission, also here in Vienna. In fact, the first Crime Commission meeting I chaired adopted a resolution confirming that corruption was a structural impediment to sustainable development, which it is. But with confirming that, we opened a path for it, a door, so it could also enter our heads. So with the convention, we finally knew what corruption was and how to criminalize corruption. During the negotiations of the convention, we decided that it is futile to strive for a global definition of corruption. It's much better to leave it to the national legal systems to define corruption. We all know what corruption is, but it has to be criminalized and defined by national systems. So corruption is different in each country. Some countries, some societies have wider, others have narrower definitions. But in the core, we know what it is. So the adoption, the negotiation, then the adoption, and then the implementation of the Convention Against Corruption slowly moved corruption into our consciousness. And countries started to build institutions to fight corruption. The idea was to build anti-corruption systems which are resilient and strong enough. Anti-corruption systems, two tiers, two kinds of it, legally based, criminal law based, and societal. But these systems have to be strengthened to an extent that we can fight corruption efficiently on the basis of the rule of law. So that happened about 20 years ago. But in the meantime, something extraordinary happened just about 5 years ago, which really put corruption into the center of the global agenda. What happened 5 years ago? In fact, 6 years ago already. We adopted Sustainable Development Goals. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals in the Agenda 2030, negotiated by all UN member states, all 194, and adopted without a vote, by consensus. Now, these 17 goals give us a strategy for the future to keep the world in a way that we can live in it, sustainable, make it more equitable, more just, more open, more fair. And to implement the goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, we have created goal 16, good governance. Create good governance structures to create a framework to implement all the others content-oriented SDGs. And target 5 in SDG 16 is the fight against corruption as a cross-cutting agenda. So suddenly corruption was at the center of SDG implementation. And slowly we recognized that in the face of the huge amounts of money, we don't even know exactly how much, because we can't really measure corruption yet. We can only estimate it. But we estimate that bribery and corruption siphons out of productive economies between $1.5 to $2 trillion a year. It's a huge amount of money, which cannot be compensated for, neither by direct investments, nor by official development assistance, nor by remittances. So the narrative becomes very clean and clear. Without success in the fight against corruption, we will not be able to raise the money to implement the Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals. So success in the fight against corruption is a precondition, a conditio sine qua non, for sustainable development.
So that was also, I take it, one of the motivations then for the creation of IACA itself, to achieve these goals and also the Sustainable Development Goals. I noted that there are some large, important countries that have not acceded to IACA. What would you say is the reason why they haven't joined yet, even though they would be very important for the fight against corruption?
Well, before I answer this question, I have to refer to the first sentence you said in your statement. the creation of IACA was not linked to the SDGs. It preceded the SDGs. The idea to come up with something that later became IACA arose in about 2007. At about 2007, we had negotiated, it was about 5 years after negotiation of UNCAC, years after implementation. It became very clear that the implementation, the speed was very slow. And the United Nations, very often, member states come together, they negotiate a legal instrument, a convention, and then they don't implement it. They lack the energy, or they're not held accountable. So very unfortunately, quite a few times, these negotiated instruments become dead wood. So we wanted to avoid this with UNCAC. I thought UNCAC is a very important instrument, not only because I co-negotiated it, I led the negotiations on the implementation chapter. And in fact, my own handwritten signature is on the document, because I signed the convention on behalf of Austria in Merida, 2003. So I have a very strong personal affinity to this convention. But I also see the value of the convention. So we wanted to avoid that this convention becomes dead wood. Therefore, we thought, how can we speed up and facilitate implementation of this convention? You have to imagine the chapters of the convention consists of a lot of legal provisions which need to be implemented. Some of them are quite complex. Now, that requires a process of technical assistance for those and to those who are supposed to implement the provisions of the convention. The United Nations, the technical assistance provisions, one of the important pillars, to help our constituents to do what they're supposed to do. There are always two sides of the process, by the way. The first step is advocacy, and the second step is technical assistance provision. What is this? What is advocacy? Well, in the case of UNCAC, advocacy would mean helping our constituents understand why implementation of UNCAC is in our shared interest. Why the fight against corruption is in our shared interest, in our common interest. And then once we have achieved that, once people are aware that they have to fight corruption, it pays off, it's necessary, it makes societies better, more equitable, then you have to ask yourself, how do we do it? How do we fight it? And how do we implement the legal instrument, which is the basis for fighting corruption? And for that, we provide technical assistance. And there was nobody who did that. The UNODC in Vienna, the guardians of the convention, are working very well, but they are very much concentrated on a normative basis. So there was no agency that provided real technical assistance, capacity building. That was my starting point when I came up with the idea. So we thought in 2007, we need to build a global program against corruption, which brings together all the complex aspects of corruption to fight it holistically, as you can see behind me, fight a holistic approach to fight corruption. And then once we know what to do, we break it up and we decide who does what. And we came up with a global architecture to fight corruption. That was the starting point. And the idea was to establish this institution within the UNODC, within the United Nations. In the middle of the process, as you mentioned in your introduction, I was called to New York in 2008. So I left the process, and those who continued the process deviated a little bit. And a few years later, in 2010, IACA was then established in Luxembourg, but not within, but outside the UN system. So that was, you could say, this was maybe a structural birth deficit. Because, within the global issues, you can only really add value if you work together. And if you're part of the system, you can just do it better. IACA was not. So IACA was in this sort of splendid isolation in Luxembourg, but it made a lot out of these 10 years. And it became a remarkable institution. Today IACA has two comparable advantages. First, IACA is the only international organization, intergovernmental international organization, that is dedicated solely to the fight against corruption. First. Second, IACA is the only international organization which is also an institution of higher learning. We are authorized to award academic degrees as university within the Bologna system. So these are two comparative advantages. And this is something really to bring to the table. And as you have rightly mentioned, we have been offering our two master's programs and our complementary summer academy to create about 3,000 students already in 161 countries. So that's quite something. And this is where we make ourselves useful. Now, your question is, why isn't everybody yet a member of IACA? That's a good question. Because if you look at the convention is 187 members. So it's more or less a global instrument. Nearly every country has ratified it, plus the European Commission. We have 80 members so far, but with a tendency growing. We're only 10 years old. So this is one of the explanations. The second explanation is that since we did not really cooperate conscientiously in a targeted way with the United Nations, we didn't receive enough attention. So a lot of countries did not yet see a merit in working with us. So we have 76 member states now from all continents, spread out, and 4 organizations. But our membership is not well balanced. We have a relatively few, when you look at our list of member states, you will recognize that we have relatively few European members. We do have some, but relatively few. And to tell you, Diana, I myself, I wasn't aware. I asked myself the same question. I said, why isn't everybody supporting our work and benefiting from our work? It's not only supporting us, but benefit from what we bring to the table and offer. And the answer was very easy and very clear and clean. Many of the major donor countries are only investing in institutions that are part of the international development system, so they can attribute their financial contributions to the official development assistance, because they all want to reach the 0.7 famous percent in the budget for not the budget, but in the of the economies, 0.7% dedicated to ODA, to official development assistance. And we were not eligible because we were not part of this famous list, Annex 2 list of the OECD. As soon as I became aware of that, we immediately knew what homework we had to do. We started working because we see ourselves, of course, as a development organization. We contribute to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, but we were not formally acknowledged within the system. So we went to the OECD immediately and worked with the Secretariat and found out that it's not enough that you dedicate yourself to an issue. You also have to display your budget in a way that it's recognized. So that's what we did. So we worked with the Secretariat and we worked with the 30 members of the DAC committee of the OECD, which decides every year which new members to add to this famous Annex 2 list. We were added just a few months ago, 2 months ago. So now we are officially part of the development system. All the contributions invested into our work are ODA acknowledgeable, and that should unlock many new opportunities, and hopefully will add quite a few countries which traditionally hold the fight against corruption very high to join us and join our fight and our work. So that was quite a lengthy explanation to your very concrete question, but this is an important question, so I wanted to respond to it in detail.
I think that's also very interesting for our listeners, because I think many will also wonder why countries so important like the United States or Germany, France or Italy have so far not joined. But as you mentioned now, I think the doors have been opened for maybe a new wave of membership to come your way. which I really hope will happen. I have another question because there's another very important agency or NGO out there which deals with anti-corruption activities, namely Transparency International. And I wanted to ask if IACA in any way cooperates with this organization.
Very much so. You have to, fighting corruption is a very complex issue. So you cannot only leave it to governments. You have to include all the stakeholders, everybody who profits from this fight against corruption, which includes, of course, governments, because they have to set the legal framework to fight corruption by adopting the laws. But then you need academia to do the research. I very strongly believe in fact-based, in evidence-based decision-making. So to provide decision makers with the facts, you need research. So we have to work with academia. Then we're working, of course, with civil society, which is essential. Transparency International is a civil society organization for different reasons. First, they have a much longer time perspective than politicians normally, who think in 4 to 5 year electoral cycles, whereas NGOs have much longer goals. So that's very important. Plus, a mobilized and conscientious civil society will need to hold decision makers accountable to do after the elections what they have promised before the elections, for example. So we work very intensely with civil society. We also work, by the way, with enterprises, with the private sector strongly, but that we touch later. So the answer to your question is yes. We work with transparency. Transparency was has been, still is, a very important organization, which moved the process towards the negotiation of the convention, and which has been, of course, very important in the implementation process. By the way, one of the founders of Transparency International is the chair of our advisory board. So we also have a very close personal relationship to transparency.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that answer. Maybe now we can focus on the programs IACA itself offers. You offer a number of master's programs, all dealing with different aspects of fighting corruption. What would you say is IACA's unique selling point for the programs? And is there any institution out there offering a similar program to yours? Or would you say that is one of your unique selling points, that you are unique?
Yeah. What makes us singular is that we're an international organization, at the same time institution of higher learning. So we have been offering traditionally 2 master's programs, one more academic, one a little bit more compliance-oriented for practitioners. Both of these programs consist of 8 modules and of 120 units, ATS units. They require a master's thesis and the defense of a master's thesis, and then we award the degree. Our addressees are mostly practitioners, judges, prosecutors, justicial personnel, teachers, academicians, all kinds of people who deal with strengthening anti-corruption systems in their job. Normally they come and they become interested in our programs mid-career. They have done a degree already, they are in their work, and they recognize that it adds value for them if they specialize on how to fight corruption. So they complement normally what they do, their expertise and their previous academic studies, with a very targeted program against corruption. This is our classic students. Now, that is not what you ask. Are others also offering similar students? Yes. There are many institutions that teach anti-corruption. Unfortunately, they are not linked. So one of our reasons is, of our goals is to connect the dots, to prevent from reinventing the wheel, to bring the system together as an incubator, a laboratory, so that we can really produce synergies. There's a lot of goodwill out there, but we're the only ones who exclusively concentrate on the fight against corruption. Now, these two programs are not the only ones we offer. When I took over IACA last year, I was very aware, after having worked all my life in the international system, that we can only perform and add value if we work with others. So we needed to get as quickly, as closely to the UN system as possible. And one of our first initiatives was to develop a joint master's program with the United Nations, which we did with UNITA. UNITA is the research branch of the United Nations, Geneva. They do a lot of useful work, but they didn't have the authority to award degrees. So we were a very sought after cooperation partner because we could bring something to the table, a comparative advantage that others didn't have. So we conceptualized this program, we worked it out, we agreed upon it, and we'll start it in September. A new program, a new master's program, diplomacy and anti-corruption, together with UNITA of the United Nations. At the same time, we diversified very much this year. You have to imagine, 2 weeks after I came on board, the 2nd of March last year, COVID restrictions locked us down. All our program deliveries were conventional, conservative, classic, face-to-face. They would bring our students to Vienna or to Luxembourg. The teachers, we would do in-classroom teaching and work. Also in connection with our member states, some of the modules were taught in different countries. But it was more or less limited and face-to-face. Suddenly, nobody could travel anymore. We couldn't bring any students to Vienna. So we had two options, lock down or reinvent ourselves. Now we took this enormous challenge as an opportunity, and what we did was, within 6 weeks, we translated 10 years of expertise and content to an e-learning base. And 6 weeks after the lockdown, we continued the delivery of our master's programs with our students participating from 5 continents, from their home offices, wherever, and our lecturers linked virtually from their offices, which has drawbacks. Some of the students complain they can't come to Vienna anymore and enjoy the intimacy of studying the closeness to the teachers. That's true. But it also opens new opportunities for us. We don't have to fly all our students to Vienna and our teachers. So we first minimize the ecological footprint. We reduce travels. We reduce costs. We get better access to teachers. Many of the teachers who are with us on our faculty are from all over the world. And to teach 2 days at IACA in Luxembourg, they had to take out a week of their work, to fly in, jet lag, whatever. Now they don't have to. They can just be connected from the office. It's much easier. So we can reach out. And what we can do now is we can, using our content and our expertise, we can dramatically upgrade our diffusion capacity. Not teaching only 2 classes of students, but teaching an unlimited amount of students globally who are linked virtually. So that gives us new opportunities. And that gives us the opportunity and the possibility to realize my vision, to make our programs available and accessible to every future diplomat, to every future manager of the international system, to every future manager of the market economy, because they are all constituents. They need to learn to see corruption where it happens as a first step. Then in the second step, they need help to understand why the fighting corruption is in our shared interest, the advocacy effect. And the third stage, they need to learn how to do it, how to fight corruption. And this is where we come into our programs. So this new e-learning platform takes away a lot of limitations from us and gives us new opportunities, which we grasp, take advantage of, by diversifying our programs. So we immediately started doing webinars, lectures on the internet, many of them free of charge, bringing constituents together, creating new master's programs, shorter programs, longer programs. We are developing our PhD program to complement our academic programs and our research. So we are diversifying and developing custom-made and very personalized products that everybody takes what fits his or her necessities.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what we try to do: diversify to meet demands better.
So COVID has provided an unexpected opportunity, maybe, to diversify, as you say. So the question is, after this pandemic will end, and we all hope it will end soon, will you continue on two tracks now, that you will have your original in-class analog courses as well as your online courses? And is this what you call the tailor-made courses that you mentioned on your website, or is that yet another branch of what IACA offers?
Well, everything we do is tailor-made because we are demand-driven. We want to offer programs which make sense and which add value and which help build capacities, always in the light of implementation of UNCAC, of the convention, and fighting corruption. Now, we do this in many, many different ways. First, you are right. COVID has presented us with an enormous opportunity. I think we might have done this anyway. This is what I had planned. But it forced us to speed up the process. Because, while we are non-for-profit, but of course we charge for the product costs. So suddenly we didn't have any income anymore from our products, which was dramatic for us. So we were forced to reinvent ourselves, which we did quickly, much quicker than we might have done in another situation. So that helped. Now, whenever COVID ends, we don't know when it ends, how it ends. Nobody can tell us when we can travel again. In this international organization, we can only offer face-to-face trainings when we can bring everybody to Luxembourg, from 5 continents. We don't know, with all the mutations, variants, when that will be. That can be years. But even in the best case scenario, there's no return to the status quo ante. We have learned too much in this challenging situation. So, if what I would like to do is, while we try to scale up our diffusion capacity, not only teach 2, 3 handful of students at one time, but thousands, tens of thousands, who can profit from our programs. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we might continue also face-to-face programs, for specific groups. I wouldn't exclude that. But we will become a predominantly virtual institution because it is much easier to offer products in this way. Plus, it makes them much more accessible and less expensive. We save all the travel costs. So our programs, even in the past, were compared to master's programs of many of the universities rather economically. And now, with cutting out travel costs, we can do this even more economically. And by the way, many of our students get financial aid.
So we're not
only teaching students from wealthy families in northern countries, but of course we want to teach students from least developed countries, from societies that need our contents most. So we try to lower the threshold and to make it possible for everybody who qualifies to participate in our program without any financial restrictions. So we have created a fund and we offer scholarships and financial support to everybody who needs it. So this is definitely a principle which I'm also developing and which we're even improving on that in the future.
That was one of my questions, and
but you
thank
also
you
mentioned the tailor-made programs.
Yes.
This is a different pillar which complement. You have to imagine. Traditionally, we had three pillars. We had the academic pillar that I already mentioned, offering our two master's programs. Here we diversify dramatically, and we'll offer many more programs. And we had what we call the tailor-made programs, capacity buildings. Now, what do we do there? We do concrete projects. For example, we do training programs for civil servants of a specific ministry of a member country.
Mm-hmm.
We teach practitioners in anti-corruption agencies, nationally or regionally. Recently, we helped build one of our member countries an anti-corruption department in their civil administration. We offer tailor-made courses for practitioners. So we do a lot of a whole variety of programs, open-ended, not exclusive. Whatever is needed, we develop for our partners. Now you have to imagine all our member states have different needs. Each one of our member states is a different system. One thing, one common denominator applies to all of them. There's no corruption-free country in the world. It happens everywhere. In some countries more, in some countries less. But nobody can cap his shoulder and say we are perfect. There's no perfect country. But the needs are different. Some countries have highly developed criminal law systems. Others have rudimentary ones. So the demands are different. So we work also with our member states on a demand base. We try to focus our products more and more, make them more efficient, and increase the impact by discussing, consulting with our clients, member states, how to sharpen and focus the products. This is what we call tailor-made. In this basket, we also work very much with the private sector. Mm-hmm. Because there's not only one convention, there are many conventions out there. And for example, the Anti-Bribery Convention of the OECD, which has by far less members, but the implementation process of which is much more advanced, forces internationally working companies in the private sector to adhere to certain principles and standards, which are introduced nationally by the countries. So to do business in the countries, companies have to adhere to the laws. So many companies have to develop and scale up their own compliance capacities to be in line, to comply with the demands. And to build up compliance capacities, they need very often outside help, technical assistance, which can be provided by consultants, but also by us. We're the only international organization that offers this kind of technical assistance. Now, many things don't have to be done by us. Others can do them well. But we can do some things others cannot. We can really bring people together. We have access to the top people in the world. We are the platform for many of the top academicians in the field where they want to teach. So we can link people better maybe than many others can do. So there is a comparative advantage we have, and there's a strong demand on our products. And this is dramatically growing because the demands on companies are increasing. So I see this as a huge growth potential for us, working with the UN Global Compact that brings together tens of thousands of global companies. All of them sign and adhere to 10 principles. The 10th, one of them is anti-bribery and anti-corruption. So this is a structure which allows us access to a whole world market of companies. Then, of course, it's the same process again. First step, help the owners understand why to comply with standards. it's not so difficult here to explain. And you see that if you look at the global investment streams, the huge sums of money that the global funds invest, there is a clear tendency that there is more investment directed to economies which have initiated the transition from fossil to sustainable energy. And there is also a weaker indication that investments are increasingly directed to companies who comply with the rules. And we want to strengthen this. So, of course, I hope that in a few years, compliance issues will be taken into consideration even more when global investment decisions are made. So there is a strong and growing interest. So, for example, last summer already, the World Economic Forum approached us. And now we are partners of the PACI initiative of the World Economic Forum, fighting corruption. And hopefully the World Economic Forum will take place again, maybe next year. Who knows when Davos can happen again. And then, of course, I want to be on board and try help the owners there understand why fighting corruption and increasing compliance capacities makes sense and increases the opportunities to increase their own earnings. So we can align interests. So this is for us a growing area, and there are not so many actors in the field. So I think there will be much more demand that we can swallow at the moment.
So I'm sure the base of your clients is very much larger than just member states, as you just mentioned. And investment, of course, always flows into those countries where there's a strong rule of law, and having strong anti-corruption and bribery rules is, I think, definitely one of those factors. Yeah. What do you look for in your professors that come to teach you? You already mentioned your students are mostly mid-career. You have compliance officers probably coming from the private sector. But who are the professors who teach for you? Do they come from other universities? Are they also practitioners? What is your typical profile?
We have a very varied faculty. Many of them are researchers. Others, they're all researchers, of course. They all have done their own research to earn their academic laurels and their degrees. And many of them looking for teaching opportunities. You have to, if you look out in the academic landscape, many universities have centers, think tanks for compliance or for anti-corruption. And the professors employed there, they're always looking for international opportunities to teach, for platforms. And there are not many. So we are maybe the only global platform for these lecturers to come and teach global students. So we are quite attractive. We have a very long list of brilliant professors. They come from, it's extremely varied, I have to say. We don't have full-time faculty. Mm-hmm. So they teach on demand. They teach classes, they overlook research work, master thesis. They prepare students for defense of the thesis. They do a lot of different work. And they also provide their research. And that I haven't mentioned yet, because in addition to the two pillars that I just described, the academic pillar and the technical assistance pillar, I would call them, we have also a research pillar. Our research pillar was quite weak the last years because, we had financial problems, which we now have overcome during the last year. That's part of our past, a big obstacle in the past, because we are financed by voluntary contributions, and that was a big issue. But now I think we are out of the intensive care, and we have a good prospect to achieve sustainable financing and stabilize our budget. Plus, we have rebuilt our budget. We have decreased the general budget and increased the share of what we earn ourselves with our products. So it's much more healthy now. So when I came on board, I said the first position I want to offer is a senior researcher. So as soon as we had some money in our box, we immediately hired a senior researcher who is now rebuilding our research department. Because that's necessary for different reasons. First, when you look around, there's a lot of research being done, in the field of anti-corruption, but it's not connected. It's very difficult to find it. There have been efforts to bring that together, but there is no repository of research being done. We want to do that. So we are building right now, as the first step, a global repository for anti-corruption research, electronically.
Like a
Where
database.
everything is put together in practical terms, that everybody who has a question regarding anti-corruption research can find the answer by clicking herself or himself through our homepage to the result. So it's a one-stop shop. And we are building this, and I think we'll be very far by the end of summer already. So that's the first low-hanging fruit and the first deliverable. In addition to becoming this repository, we have to build up also an own research capacity. Why? We have to be in a position to identify lacunae, gaps, and direct global research into these areas where it's relevant. There's a lot of research needs to be done in the field of anti-corruption. We are lacking behind. We have not enough research on the efficiency of anti-corruption systems and approaches, strategies. Mm-hmm. We need to do research. If you look at our convention, the politically most relevant or most interesting chapter is asset recovery. Repatriation of funds which have been illicitly acquired and transferred abroad. The famous case of the kleptocrats who provide for the pension fund, for their own pension fund, by stealing from their citizens and transferring the money into bank accounts abroad. It was always easy to locate this money, billions, the famous Apache billions and others, in Swiss, UK, whatever bank accounts. And this money was then frozen, but there was no legal provision to get this money back to those who own it, to the national economies. There was just no way to do that. And there was an interest, countries that had this money, albeit frozen in the economic cycle, still profited from this money. So here the convention really is providing us with very practical legal instruments to get this money back. But 15 years after entry into force the convention, we haven't improved much. We still don't know exactly what kind of international cooperation we need, what kind of information sharing, which steps are necessary to set processes into motion, what they do with these funds exactly once they're located. So there are many, many open questions which need to be researched. Or, for example, we still cannot measure corruption. That's a huge one. Too big for us. We cannot do that. This has to be taken up by a bigger institution. We can help, centralize and be maybe a facilitator here, but that's a big issue. Come up with a way to really quantify and measure corruption. So there are many, many open issues. In spite of the research being done, which needs to be focused into areas where they produce the most important return. So this will be our role in our second stage. And in the third stage of our research pillar, we are developing a PhD program to complement the two master's programs, our research, and also the technical programs. We will not do this by ourselves. This will be a process to bring together global academia, network, bring in many of the centers of excellence that do already train, and build an academic platform where we are just facilitating again in the center as the international organization. We are also, this is one of our big efforts. We don't want to sit on our products. We'll be extremely happy to make our modules available so they can be introduced and inserted into existing curricula, for example. To teach all the future diplomats and all the future world leaders and international managers, we'll have to introduce anti-corruption modules into international relations programs, into the curricula of diplomatic academies, but also into the curricula of business schools. So this is what we want to do. Make our products available, diffuse them, and make use of them. That will all, of course, be very much overseen by our research branch, so that we can really draw hard facts from the research, which we can make available to decision makers. You see, in the COVID crisis, governments who work with science normally do much better than governments who don't. That's a very good example that evidence-based decision making makes sense. And in the fight against corruption, we want to provide the evidence, the hard facts, drawn from research.
So it seems like you have many, many projects in the pipeline, and you've really advanced your institution greatly in this COVID year and have used the time very wisely. Also by putting your institution on new financial grounds, it seems. So you have voluntary contributions, but you don't have member state contributions, as far as I understood.
Voluntary contributions are from member states.
They come from and also from private
institutions. From member states, also private sector, mostly from member states. Yeah.
And on your website, I noticed that you have 3 different types of advisory boards. What role do they play in your day-to-day running, or are they more like a steering committee? How would you characterize those advisory boards?
That's a very good question. This is something we really have to also overlook and conceptualize anew. Every international institution has boards, advisory boards. So we have a board of governors that oversees what we do. I'm accountable to my board of governors. I'm employed by my board of governors. My contract was signed by the chair of the board of governors. So I'm not appointed by a country, but I'm appointed by the board of governors of our institution, consisting of 12 members from 12 different countries. So that's the governing board. That works very well. And, our assembly of parties has granted a lot of responsibility to the governing board. So it prepares the budget, it oversees what the work I'm doing, but also it oversees budget implementation, product development. So my highest authority is the board of governors that I'm accountable to. Then we have an international senior advisory board, which gives us advice, or gives advice to the board, in fact. It's not so clear cut. This is global personalities who have a very good insight, understanding for what we are doing, and they advise us. That was not so easy during the time of COVID because nobody could travel, and the main concern was staying away from the virus. So the advisory board will need to be strengthened. So we're working with the chair and with the members how we can benefit even better from our advisory board. And the third board is our academic advisory board. Now, academic advisory board we're working with very concretely because all our program developments, the academic program development, are reviewed by our advisory board. So we're working with the advisory board well, very constructively, also with the chair of the advisory board, and we benefit very much from their expertise. And I wouldn't introduce a new product without having it tested, because we want to be highest quality, a center of excellence, and for that you really need advice and you need perfect criticism, constructive criticism, to be aware of the weaknesses and to compensate for them. So I am seeing an even greater role. With the board of governors, I think we're working so well there's nothing to, there's no need to improve greatly. But with the other boards, I would like to strengthen cooperation even more so that we can benefit from their advice more directly.
Excellent. Thank you also for discussing the future plans of IACA, which you've mentioned actually a lot of already. But as my final question, I wanted to ask you, where do you see IACA in 5 to 10 years from now? I know you've mentioned many of the projects you're already working on, but is there anything you still would like to share with our listeners?
I have a very clear vision, but the vision is developed from the situation we're in. When in 2007, when we started conceptualizing an institution to facilitate implementation of UNCAC, I thought the most efficient institution has to be as close to the core of the United Nations as possible. Because this is the mechanisms. Alone you're weak. In cooperation with the international system, you're strong. Therefore, I will make every effort to make our work available to the United Nations and to add value to the work of the United Nations. So the relationship I see our organization in with is a little bit like, the United Nations and UNCAC, UNODC, very much on a normative level. Gardens often responsible for the convention in all its aspects. And our role is more the implementation agency of concrete projects. Mm-hmm. So the UNODC works sort of on a meta level, and we do the footwork. We teach programs, we work with people, we build capacity, we make technical assistance available. So this will be our role. So in the ideal world, I would like to have a global program against corruption as soon as possible. We don't have that yet. And I think that's a weakness. We do have a program which came out of one of the Conference of States parties from the Doha conference, where one country, Qatar, is financing a very important global program in which corruption is one of the 4 aspects. Okay. But it's not an anti-corruption program. I think corruption is so important and hot today that it deserves an own comprehensive program against corruption, which brings all the players together, under the lead of the United Nations, of course. And in this possible future global anti-corruption architecture, IACA hopefully will play the role of the implementation agency, always concentrating and never neglecting and even improving on our academic programs, which are receiving a lot of attention. Last year, during the G20 presidency of Saudi Arabia, education against corruption was introduced as a new aspect into the working group against corruption. And so we were introduced there and we are contributing. So this is something which gets increasing attention. So these academic programs, I think, will be widened and strengthened. But at the same time, we will develop new fields, as I mentioned, the private sector, which is a huge field, increasingly exploding, with very few players. And then, of course, also we have to do this advocacy work. So I think we will expand. So in the last 10 years, we were quite narrow, mm-hmm. which allowed us to develop the programs we're offering today, which is very good. I think we really bring something to the table which is unique. Yes. So my predecessor has done very good work that I can build upon. But now it's the time to make this a key available to a much larger group of recipients within multipliers, and the multiplier is the UN system. So I don't know exactly how our organization will look like, But I will try to approach the UN system as quickly and as possible, as to get as close as possible to make our work available, to introduce it, and of course, it will be part of the decision-making process. Otherwise, we cannot really do our work. So this is the direction I'm aiming. So it will be academy, agency, organization, but always on the implementation level of the UN system. And there's a lot to do, huge challenges. To just reach out. See, my biggest challenge now, to just give you an idea, in the past, many of our students were introduced to us by our parties. But now we have to go far beyond that. And with these virtual platforms, we can do so. But how do we reach all the people who could benefit from us? We're still not well known enough. Mm-hmm. Many people who could benefit from our work don't know about us. But when I sit in front of my computer and work, very often on my screen, suddenly a book appears that I have looked for at Amazon or anywhere else a few days earlier. Or another product appears that I might have mentioned to a friend. So somebody seems to know what I want and need. They call this targeted advertising.
Yes.
So somebody obviously is able to write algorithms, which exactly target what I expressed or didn't express. So my question is, how do we get to the point that anybody working in a field of anti-corruption, anywhere in the world, in Sudan or in Thailand or in Australia, they sit in front of the screen and they try to find a solution to an issue. And suddenly they have the IACA logo on the screen saying, why don't you check out our homepage? Maybe we can help you. Maybe we have a product you can benefit from. Mm-hmm. This is where I want to get. So that's my biggest challenge now. So if anybody listens to our conversation, who is a real whiz, who is an internet genius, and who knows how to develop such an algorithm, please, I'd be very happy to have a conversation, because that's where I wanted to go. That people become aware what we have to offer to them, so they can do their work in the fight against corruption more efficiently and better.
Thank you very, very much. I hope that iGlobenews, in its small way, can contribute to your message getting out there. And you have very ambitious plans, but I have no doubt that seeing how successful you've been since you've taken over, that you will continue with this positive trend. And I also would like to thank our listeners for tuning in to this podcast. And I hope you tune in next time to our iGlobenews pods. And thank you very much, Dr. Thomas Stelzer, for this very, very interesting and informative interview. And now I think we all know much, much more on how to best fight corruption. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I invite each and every participant in this conversation to join our fight against corruption, because we can only achieve that together, providing transparency, information, accountability, and energy to fight corruption globally. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.